obituary. Thank you very much for inviting me here to speak today. Thank you, Karen, for organising us. I'll try and move quickly, so we have got some time for questions. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lift it higher. Lift it higher.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's very good. I got technology. Yeah. You can tell there are people involved. So I'm going to be talking about recent advances in SIDS and issues around Cosleeping. SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, used to be called cot death. It's still the largest cause of unexpected deaths in infants in Western countries, even though we've had dramatic success. In 1987 here, we had 52 deaths. We had about 5 last year. So there are more than 8,000 babies alive in Australia who wouldn't have been if it hadn't been for red nose and SIDS in kids, without much government money. There was a definition put forward by the Americans, the NICHD, which it was there last week. I'm not sure about this week. In 1991, the sudden death of an infant under a year of age, which remains unexplained after a thorough case investigation, and you need 3 things. You need a complete autopsy, you need examination of the death scene, and you need to review the clinical history. So that really tightened up everything. In 2004, a group of us got together at a pub in San Diego and decided we should actually update the definition. And so we added an association with sleep, because the baby is usually found in a cot in the morning. And we replaced death scene with circumstances of death, because we wanted to take investigators away from the cot to look at their environment. It was a mistake. We should have said death scene including circumstances of death, but we only had 2 days to do it. One of the great arguments is, is SIDS a heterogeneous group or is it a single entity? There are still people who believe it's a single entity. There are people who believe the Earth is flat. They want it to be simple. They want SIDS to be A disease of a cause, therefore it has a cure, and life's not as simple as that. John Emery, a paediatric pathologist in the UK, said there's a danger of SIDS becoming a convenient diagnostic dustbin, so that any baby you find in a cot is a cot death.
Yeah.
And I went through, when I was at Children's Hospital for 10 years, all the old cases from 1970s and 1980s, and a lot of them weren't SIDS. They were unsafe sleeping environments, they were infections, they were heart disease. So research done on that early material can't be trusted because it's not pure SIDS. I love this. This was the first sentence in an abstract at the National Australian SIDS meeting a few years ago, using the anaesthetised adult male rat as a model for SIDS. now, to me, they're different. Once we started realising that babies were not rats, we found risk factors that we could change, and that's when we started saving lives. Actually, I can see it down the back. That's excellent. I don't need to keep telling you. I get there eventually. The best way of looking at SIDS, and people say, do we understand SIDS? And I think we do. And the triple risk model is the best. You have a predisposed infant, so there's something not quite right with the baby. May appear completely normal, but probably isn't completely up to scratch. Vulnerable period between 2 to 4 months when their nervous system is maturing. And the external stresses, cigarette smoke, overheating, sleeping face down. So you put it all together. Critical period, the vulnerable infant, the stresses, and some babies, not all, will die of SIDS. But just because you give people information doesn't mean you're going to act on it. That was a house recently, not in this state, where a baby died co-sleeping with a drunk father. They had what's called a peppy pod, that little plastic thing that had been provided to them to make a safe cot for the baby. What have they done with it? They made a bed for the dog. This is my favourite one, this is from a long time ago. It's Melissa Williamson, 35, a Bullitt Avenue resident, worries about the effect on her unborn child from the sound of jackhammers from the road. Jackhammers, and she's smoking. And that was 10 years after we knew about it. So this is the shallow end of the tune call, right? I get very frustrated. Actually, I plagiarised. I'm going to look. I probably wrong with somebody. What are the characteristics? 0.5 to 4 per 1,000 live births. In the bad old days in New Zealand, they got up to 9 per 1,000 in Dunedin. Lower socioeconomic status, Males more than females, twice as many males, they are the weaker sex, as some of you know. Prematurity, low birth weight, and in the winter months. What fascinates me about this graph is people say, oh, it's because of changes in the womb. Well, if it's changes in the womb, to me, then that first column, because that's the number of cases against age, and you can see after about 6 months it dies off, but there aren't too many in the first little while, and if it was from the womb, you'd expect more. So I think what it means is that 1 to 4 months, it's environmental interacting with the baby. And winter months, when I first started the Women's and Children's back in '89, we get probably 2 or 3 SIDS deaths a week in June and July. So I've got a baby that's clinically well, and pathologically there's no reason for it to die. And that's a pretty bad sort of situation. If you want to write a paper, write it on SIDS. There are so many theories. There's respiratory, cardiac, infectious, biochemical, occults. I used to believe that the fairies were stealing the babies. I tell my students, don't believe everything you read. Now, I don't believe the girl raised by wolves. The man shot dead by champagne called Cosleeping, and brothers sharing the same wife. As I come from Tasmania, I find that possible. I'm not going to review all of the possible mechanisms because we don't have the time. There is a book that I did in 2018 with the University of Adelaide Press, and it's basically the most up-to-date book. It goes through chapters on parental breathing, the history of SIDS, neuropathology, autopsies. It's a free download. The University of Adelaide Press, of course, no longer exists because it's been closed by the university because it's not making money. I'll let you draw your own conclusions with that. We're going to concentrate on some of the local research that I've been doing that I found interesting, in particular 2 things. One on beta-amyloid precursor protein, APP. I did work with the University of Aarhus in Denmark on that. And substance P, that's a chemical in the back of the brain. I worked with Harvard University with that. Now, beta-APP, it's a protein that accumulates in the brain when there's injury. So if you hit over the head and you survive, you'll have beta-APP. If you become short of oxygen because you have a heart attack, you'll get beta-APP. If you have poison, beta-APP. It's non-specific. But the incredible thing is, that's what it looks like. But the way we look for it is we take an organ in the brain, we section it, we make slides, and then we stain the slides. And we're using a brown stain here, and the top corner is what the brain should look like. All those brown spots are APP accumulation. And you can grade it. And I had a PhD student from Denmark who came out. She's completely obsessive compulsive. She's wonderful. She looked at 2,000 slides, all unnamed. She didn't know what they were. And there were 4 groups: SIDS, head trauma, infection, and mechanical asphyxia. And she measured the amount of APP in each area of the brain. There are 8 areas. And what I find fascinating is those 2 circles, SIDS and mechanical asphyxia, they're almost identical. So that to me is very, very strong evidence that it's an asphyxial mechanism, not trauma. The parents haven't hurt the child, and not these occult infections. What we think is going on is brainstem failure. The brainstem is a part of the back of the brain that controls your heart, your respiration, and your nervous system functions. It's a very important part of the brain. You can't live without it. So I said to my dog, who was one of my chief supporters, I think substance P is involved, and I got this look, but oh, here we go. Now, substance P, back of the brain, controls your breathing, controls your heart rate. You need it. And we decided to do a very simple study. We just took sections of the brainstem and we just stained them without looking at particular areas. And even my old mother would know that the SIDS baby is stained a lot less than the controls. So they had less substance P. So I talked to the people at Harvard. They were looking at this chemical serotonin. And I said, what about substance P? And they said, well, if you can fund a student to come across, we could work together. So Fiona Bright went across, spent about 18 months at Harvard, and they've got this very sophisticated autoradiography, it's called. They use, I don't know what they use now, I've forgotten. So it's very complicated. SIDS on that side, controls on this side, and they're fluorescent markers. Red means a lot, and you can see the controls have a lot more red, a lot more substance P than the SIDS. And if you look at that MTS area, virtually empty in the SIDS babies compared to the controls. So we looked at 14 areas. 9 were the same in controls as SIDS. 5 were deficient. 2 of those controlled your response to low oxygen. 3 controlled head and neck movement. And that hadn't been described before. And so we would say for decades, why don't they just lift their heads? They've got their heads buried in pillows, they're getting hypoxic, just lift your head up. They don't lift their heads because they can't, because they're substance P deficient. I think that's probably the most exciting neuropathological development in SIDS in the last 20 years, but it hasn't really got traction because a lot of the neuropathology labs are closing. Harvard was there last week. And that's a tragedy, because that is a very good. I've got a friend who's at the CDC, and she managed the child health, infant health program. She's been doing it for 30 years. Got an email about a month ago saying, bye. And so the message went out to all of us, download from the websites, get as much information as you can, because it's being changed. Co-sleeping, that's gone, yeah, absolutely. Gone from being the cause of SIDS to being simply not possible. In the old days, everybody slept together, so basically the babies were overlain. The Dr. Fern in the 19th century in London said, I've got babies who die in cots on their own. How do they overlay? And so people said, well, maybe there's something else. And then it became, oh, it's simply not possible. A parent could not overlay their baby. By co-sleeping or shared sleeping, we mean sharing of a sleeping surface by an infant with a non-infant. So it's with a parent. That bottom one is also probably toxic gas inhalation. Cats, dogs. That one on the couch, that's appalling. Couches are very dangerous. There are a lot of arguments and standoffs about it. Are there any midwives here? Okay. I always used to lecture midwives. It was like the good, the bad, and the ugly. With people standing around, you wonder which one's going to jump me first. And they jump up and say, I slept with 5 of my babies, they didn't die, so it's rubbish. And I said, well, that's like a Vietnam vet coming back saying I wasn't shot, so there were no bullets. No risk is absolute. And then I was asked to speak at the National Midwives Convention, and I said the 2 groups that are hardest to get through to, heroin addicts and midwives. It went dead quiet, and I said, and I'm told by one of my medical students, they're not mutually exclusive. So I said, well, now that I've got your attention, why did I do that? And I said, I did it because we're all trying to save babies. None of us in this room want a baby to die. So why can't we just sit down and talk? I got about 60% of them back, but was never invited to speak to that group again. If you look at the internet, there's a whole lot of conflicting messages. I let my parents sleep in the big bed with me, but it can be dangerous. This one I think is quite offensive. It's the Milwaukee Department of Health, and they made the parents' bed a grave. There were too many babies last year. This was their final resting place. I think that's a terrible thing that for parents to see. How long has it been around? Well, in the Book of Kings, thousands of years ago, 2 women came to Solomon and said, that's my baby. Solomon would have made a great forensic pathologist. Each one would cut it in 2 and give 1 bit to each woman, and they'd go away. The real mother was a bit distressed. The other mother didn't react. She had lost her child due to overlaying. So it's been around for a while. This is a device that the Florentines invented in the 18th century. If you slept in bed with a baby and didn't use one of these, the baby died, you could be excommunicated. And that's pretty serious. It's a strange device. You can see D is the bar of wood to lean on when you're with the child, and C are the hollows for the nurse's breasts. So I assume he gives one side at a time. I've not seen one used. The harsh reality, and I've had arguments with paediatricians for 30 years about this, is that some infants are not going to survive a night in the parent's bed. You get large, tired, intoxicated parents, soft mattress and heavy coverings. That's dangerous. And some babies are very vulnerable. I don't know whether any of you knew Harry Burnell, the great paediatrician of the women's and children's. He had a child that was having these odd episodes where it stopped breathing, and he tested everything, couldn't work out what was going on, so he did a reenactment. Mum would breastfeed the baby, go and make a cup of tea, having given the baby to her mother, who had large breasts and a padded nightgown, and she would hold the baby, and it just went like that. And he said it was incredible. You put your hand over the baby's nose and mouth, and it would stop breathing. So some babies are really at risk. I did this triple risk for shared sleeping, which nobody has ever published, but I thought it was interesting. Infant, parent, and bed. Features the infant, premature, small, young, parents sedated or intoxicated, tired, multiple co-sleepers. Some babies will die. Not all, but some. People say there's no animal model. Now that's my dog, Lucy, 3rd from the end. Which pup died? The one that was burrowing under the arm, because he was overlaid. Now, pigs also overlay their piglets. Lucy survived, I mean, slightly brain damage. We'll go back to APP, that protein in the brain that accumulates when you get damage. What we decided to do is let's look at APP staining in kids sleeping on their own, SIDS cases, compared to co-sleepers. Just took a punt to see if there's a difference. And what we found, there's two groups here, there's Australia and Denmark, different levels of staining, because different labs, but consistently and statistically significant, the SIDS babies had higher APP levels. Now, is that because they're dying more slowly or because they've had previous episodes? I don't know. It means they're different though. So this is what I say to pediatricians, okay, you say they're the same, how do you explain this? Then I did a very simple study which shows that even in the University of Adelaide Plain, you can actually do studies that are important. I just compared the sex ratio of SIDS cases to co-sleepers. SIDS, male-to-female 2-to-1, as it is everywhere, co-sleepers 1-to-1. The Avon study in Bristol that thinks that what I'm saying about suffocation is heresy did the same study and came up with the same results. Did they say the pathologist was right? No, they said the pathologist knows everything, but always too late. They said it doesn't matter what the mechanism is, rubbish, of course it doesn't. So, the evidence is babies who die in shared sleeping situations are different to lone sleepers, equal sex ratio, less APP. So, accidental suffocation occurs. Why is it important to tell parents that? So that they don't subject another child to that. There was a case of a hospital here, and a colleague of mine, ex-colleague, did the autopsy on the first case, and it was in the postnatal ward, and mum had fallen asleep with the baby, and her breast was over its mouth and nose. Baby died, he called it SIDS. A year later, exactly the same thing happened. I did the autopsy, I called it asphyxia. They changed the hospital protocols. Not another case has occurred. Now, is he responsible for the second death? He was patronising the parents by not telling them the truth. And I think it's not the job of medicos to patronise parents. They're not stupid, they know what's happened. We need to explain what we found in as compassionate a manner as we can, but we've got a duty to tell them what has happened. Last thing I'll talk about is maternal weight and infant death. There's been this historical conflict. My mate Ed Mitchell in New Zealand is a paediatrician, and in 2006 said maternal body weight is not an independent risk factor for SIDS, nor does maternal obesity increase the risk of SIDS with bed sharing. Pretty clear. Except around the same time, I said obesity is a definite risk factor in a shared sleeping situation. One of us is completely wrong. Last year, US studied 19 million babies, and they came out, lo and behold, and said maternal obesity is indeed a risk factor, so unexpected death. But they didn't look at shared sleeping. What do they say? Oh, it's probably some inherited metabolic condition. Rubbish. Let's just keep it simple, stupid. So my hypothesis was if co-sleeping is a danger, a slim parent on a queen-size bed should be the safest, and a morbidly obese parent on a couch should be the most dangerous. So I just did this semi-quantification. I got the parent's BMI, the body mass index with height and weight, divided by the bed surface area. Don't worry about this. What you've got down the side is the BMI going very skinny to morbidly obese. Then you've got increasing amount of space. Skinny person on a queen-size bed, my index is 5. Morbidly obese person on the couch is 50. So I've got a way of scoring this. And if you put a graph in, sofas are highly dangerous. So don't tell me that SIDS. So I think infants are in danger of suffocation if the sleeping space reduces. My forensic colleagues think I'm a complete idiot. They say, well, yes, stating the bleeding obvious to them, but not to everybody. And the sleeping space reduces as the parent gets bigger or the bed size gets smaller. And also the trough around the parents. If it's deeper, more chance of the kid going into it, and it's deeper if you're bigger. I'm not demonising shared sleeping. In Southeast Asia, it's quite safe. I just want to identify factors that may put an infant at risk. And hopefully the index can be used to actually predict dangerous environments, and so people can avoid them. Thank you. Questions are $10, and you have to pay me before.
Questions? Anyone have questions, please? Yes.
Thank you. Hello? Yes. Hello? Anyway, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor. That was enlightening. and funny as well, terrific. I read with interest the write-up of your AC earlier in the week, and it's delighted to read it. And it was said in there something about a lady who contacted you many years later. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, because that obviously meant a great deal to her.
To all of us, actually. Some pathologists in forensics refuse to talk to families, I think because I've got a general practice qualification. They realise the importance of taking information to the community. So I talk to a lot of parents. And I talked to her after I'd autopsied her daughter 25 years ago. I just got a phone call and she's talking to me and said, "Do you remember the case?" And yes, I do. And we talked and she just said every day she thinks of her daughter. And then she sent me a photograph and a poem that little girl had written. So people say, how can you do this job? You can do it if you're hoping to make improvements in community health. And also, when you get feedback like that, you know that it's meant something to somebody. So there's more to forensics than just, you know, in some dingy basement doing an autopsy.
Thank you. You mentioned in Southeast Asia, there's they don't have that issue with co-sleeping and SIDS or asphyxiation. What is the difference?
I've got a colleague of mine is an anthropologist, and he was saying that sleeping with your baby reduces the risk of SIDS. He said that 30 years ago and still hasn't produced evidence. But he would talk about Southeast Asia. So I said, okay, let's look at Southeast Asia. Let's sneak around and peek through a bedroom window in Southeast Asia. There's a bamboo mat on the floor, two non-intoxicated, slim Asian parents with the baby up the top. That's safe. It's shared sleep, but it's safe. Sneak around where I live, peeking through bedroom windows. You'll see. This is being recorded, isn't it? This is not something I do. I've just heard about it. But with the soft mattresses, obese parents, they've had 9 pints of Guinness and a Vindaloo, and they've stuffed the baby down between them. That is dangerous. So we've made it dangerous, actually.
Yeah.
Is that what
You want to jump in?
I'd just like to ask a question. Is it safe to sleep with your wife?
You know the answer to that. I speak with authority. I have to.
Wonderful presentation. The communication of what you've done is pretty special. I think a lot of people in your position talk often in words which people don't understand. There's no communication. And I'd just like to give a great compliment on the communication method that you have used. Well done.
That's actually why I use the dogs, because it does break it up. I gave a workshop in Hong Kong, and a bottle of wine, and the person got the correct number of 32 pictures of dogs. Out of control.
How many cases of SIDS do we have in South Australia?
The question is, how many cases of SIDS do we have? It's very interesting. I did a study looking at the way pathologists diagnose cases. We certainly had a fall off from our 50s down to probably 20, and then I was delighted that we had 5 last year, but then we had 5 undetermined. So pathologists shift in their diagnosis. So it's plateaued at about 10, but that's a lot less than 50. But the problem's still there, and it's interesting. The kids are being put to sleep face down, parents are smoking. There's a hard group of people to get through to, often itinerant mums. So that's the big issue, I think.
Well, thank you, Roger. Did we all go away? Don't go away. we all go away with important memories from your talk, and as has been said, much amusement as well. An amazing combination. I have the honour of offering to you, presenting to you a memento of your talk, as your presentation today has enabled us to come together and support the ideals of Rotary.